load shedding. The minister had spent some time here about 2 days ago, and I've now learned never to go on road shows, because I've never been on a road show to complete it. The minister called me back to be here. Yes, in fact, it's the third time I get stopped on a road show, so I guess I should never go to Boston. So, Minister and the board and management, we spent some time this mid-morning, and sorry for the delay. And the Minister wanted to come and address you and share with you and hopefully give you some comfort that one, we don't like where we put the country, two, the circumstances leading us to where we are, and what we're doing about it. Minister, over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Chairperson. Yeah, he has this unfortunate relationship with me. We just get called back from road shows, you know. But this time it was in good circumstances, so that's fine. We're here today because we've taken a very intensive look at what's the problem in Eskom. What's going right, because there are many things that are, and what's not working adequately at the moment. How do we address those issues? How do we persuade the public that the board and current management team at Eskom has a good handle on what the issues are, and that we are able to communicate very frankly, both with yourselves as interlocutors, but with the public as well, about A, why load shedding, B, what's the root cause of some of the load shedding that we've been experiencing, C, what are the plans that we are putting forward, and D, what assurances can we give to the public in these circumstances. And the assurances are going to be difficult in the sense that you don't know when the next break in the system is going to be, but nonetheless, after I think we've spent about 10 intensive hours, if not more, over and above other interactions with the management team, interrogating the generation system, the coal supply system, this level of skills within the management team and at the power station level, understanding the context in which we find ourselves. This was an institution, just in case you've forgotten, that was one of the centers of state capture. And part of the state capture process, by now I'm sure you've learned, although we tend to forget these things, was to ensure that you have the right minister in place, you have the right board in place, you have the right compliant management in place, good, honest people with the right level of technical skills are either pushed aside, or they're forced to leave, or they are victimized in some kind of way. And today, you begin to feel the effects of state capture on the one hand, but also the reality that you have very old power stations that are operating, and the replacement capacity, which I'll come back to in a moment, that we were supposed to be building in the form of Medupi and Kusile, over and above other things that might be happening in this energy space, is not adequately providing the coverage. But we also want to tell the public very frankly what the issues are that we are actually dealing with. So as the Chair said, firstly, apologies for the inconvenience that is caused, and we've asked the management team at Eskom, together with municipalities and other suppliers of electricity, to take a much more careful look at the published schedules and what the reality is on the ground and the experiences citizens have. Because one of the immediate complaints would be, today I'm not supposed to be the one that's supposed to be, inverted commas, load shedded, and yet it is happening to me. What's going wrong? And we will get some reports in that regard within the next few days as well. The second reason we must apologize is that I think Eskom doesn't communicate adequately. And we've said so to the management team. Sending out a tweet about load shedding is not communicating. And so hopefully from next week we get better communication, but by the end of next week, hopefully we don't get the level of load shedding that we have had as well. And thirdly, we need to explain, and that's why we're here both as the board, as the shareholder, and as the management. We need to explain to yourselves and the public where exactly is the problem, and like I said, where are we taking this issue. So, what are some of the root causes of where we are? The first is, of course, the nature of the fleet of power stations that we have. Eskom currently has 47,000 megawatts of installed capacity. Its planned outages, that is, the plans that have been developed maybe a year or two ago to cut down operations either as a power station as a whole or within units in power stations so that repairs can in fact be done, was supposed to be 7,500 megawatts. Instead, what we've had in addition to the 7,500 is somewhere between 9,000 and 11,000 megawatts, so let's call them breakdowns for now. And as a result, if you add another 2,500 of what is called the reserve margin, in other words, that's a safety that needs to be kept all the time in order for the system to work, then we are unable to meet the current demand of about 29,000 megawatts, which is what you have in summer. So you fall about 2,500 less than that. So what do we have? You have potential for 47,000, but in reality, you are only able to supply 27,000 megawatts at a particular point in time with the unpredictability of the breakdowns that accompany it. So that's the first issue. The unplanned breakages, the 9,000 to 11,000 megawatts, is the area that we are concerned about. And some of it can be ascribed to the age of the plant, but the second major issue that emerges is that from about 2010 or just before onwards, the investment in maintaining, that means repairing, small repairs, medium-sized repairs, and big-scale repairs, to put it in very simple, non-technical terms. I'm also learning about this industry from the experts that are here. These repairs were not done adequately. And the reason that is now something that we can find out about is that enough money wasn't put into particularly the so-called big repairs and the mid-term repairs themselves. But you can only do repairs if you can still keep the energy system moving. In other words, if you don't have enough of a safety margin, you can't undertake the level of repairs that you actually require to do so. So you have a double whammy, in a sense. You have declining production, you have the need for repairs, partly there's, let's call it lack of attention in terms of detail and planning, but partly it's the nature of the plant. And we're not sure yet whether there's an element of undermining of the power system as well. Let's call it sabotage. You saw bits of it during the labor disputes that we had around June, July, where one or other water pump would be shut down, or another pipe would be shut down, or ash wouldn't be removed, or diesel couldn't reach the plant, or the coal trucks couldn't get in. So there'll be a very intensive look over the next 10 days, that's part of the action plan, to understand exactly what the nature of the problems are, which ones are easily fixable, which ones will take some time to fix, and how do we arrange all of that in the proper way. The next big area is the quality of maintenance. In other words, you can say, I fixed X, but if X is fixed in the form of a lousy, very old Band-Aid, which is supposed to last a week, but it actually starts becoming unstuck in 2 days, then effectively you haven't fixed it at the end of the day. So some of that is attributable to technical skills within Eskom. Some of it is attributable to contractors that are brought in to undertake these repairs. And the supervision of those contractors and consequence management if the contractors don't do what they're supposed to do. So that's the second if you like, big area that will be given attention as we go forward. The third big area is the new build, Kusile and Medupi. We can give you the details later if you're interested, but essentially 3 units at Medupi and I think 1 or 2 at Kusile should be giving us 7,800 megawatts already into the system. They're not. And what we're discovering as a result of an investigation that has been started by Eskom is that the original equipment manufacturers, the people who are putting the boilers in and the grinders in and all the various equipment that needs to be putting in this equipment are doing a substandard job. There will be consequences for them as we go forward, but those are serious issues. These are international players who, in the first instance, are the main contractors like Hitachi, and then a number of subcontractors as well. And if you're going to get substandard work, and then we're spending twice the amount of money that we're supposed to be spending, and taking X years longer than we should be taking, then you have a toxic mix, which means that the safety margin that these 2 power stations, as we've always been telling the country, are supposed to be providing is no longer there with any level of certainty. So that's another stream of work that is going to get into a lot more intensive examination as we go forward. In the last 2.5 to 3 years, this is the third or fourth area, what we've also had is a decline in the amount of money available and budgeted for both, if you like, low-level repairs and big repairs or maintenance that needs to be done. And that maintenance expenditure, and part of it is capex as well because you've got to buy big parts, has also impacted on the availability of parts in time. So I've been educated, as I think the chair was as well this morning, about the fact that some of these parts, like a huge fan, which is probably taller than the ceiling, would take 1.5 years to manufacture. So you can't order it today and even expect it in 6 months' time. You've got to have careful planning in order to make sure that you get the parts that are necessary in order to undertake the big maintenance or repairs that are actually required. So as a consequence, ladies and gentlemen, what we have, and there are many other reasons as well, is that the operational side of the business is not doing as well as it should. And this is accompanied also by the fact that at 7 of the power stations, for example, we have acting managers. At the senior level in the organization, there are also vacancies, and there's restructuring that's going on, which I'm sure you're going to ask about as we get to that later. An additional component that we have to also confess to you on is that the Department of Public Enterprises is supposed to have a handle on what's really going on in this entity. But I think we have one energy expert in the department. Right? So we have no capacity. That capacity was run down. The public was told this is Eskom on the one hand is a top class entity still operating on a world-class basis. I think you'll remember the narrative of 2 years ago. But in the meantime, all the malfeasance that we know about and mismanagement is what actually has been going on here. There are also historical issues, so I can't blame everything on the more recent past. But we now need to strengthen the department's capacity to monitor and understand what is going on so that the appropriate interventions can actually take place. Now, so that's, if you like, the diagnostic part. What are we going to do about it, and what assurances can we give the public? So what I've said to the board and the management is that we need a plan which is almost completed on a week-by-week basis between now and the end of January. Secondly, that plan must state very clearly who is taking responsibility for what, within what kind of time frame, and what's expected in terms of the result, for example, of assessing the key parts of a power station and where the weaknesses in those parts might actually be. Accompanying this must be consequence management. If, for example, somebody tells us in the Eskom management, I'm going to contract for 10 million tons of coal by the end of December for argument's sake, and they've only done 4, then somebody's got to take the fall for it. And if there's no consequence management, then we can all do what we like and operate with the kind of impunity that we might have actually seen in the past. All senior managers within Eskom have been asked to cancel their leave. All senior managers in Eskom, and depending on how you define senior management, but the CEO can explain that, have also been assigned to power stations to go down personally, understand what's actually happening at a power station level, so that we actually have both quantitative and qualitative information and can then tell the country we can give you certain assurances. Right now, all we have is a set of objectives. So in the immediate context, what we also need to do is to get this system in place and working by Monday morning, if not tomorrow. And by Tuesday or Wednesday, we'll be able to get feedback, and some of that feedback is already coming from the power stations themselves. Part of the assessment they need to make is what's the level of skill that is actually there on the ground. Now, there are excellent people who might be sitting here at Megawatt Park who have good skills, but they're sitting behind a desk and operating a computer. You don't operate, I suppose, with paper. So, rather than can we deploy them? To undertake some of what we are talking about. What's our objective is that we don't want any more load 2 or level 2 load shedding as much as possible within the next week or so. In other words, the kind of stuff that most irritates the citizens of this country, and it's perfectly understandable that it should actually do so, is what we need to remove and alleviate in terms of the public's experience of Eskom and electricity supply in our case. Between the 15th of December and the 15th of January, there is lower demand in any case because of the shutdown of industry and so on, and no load shedding should be expected during that period, and the management must give us the assurance that they're working towards that particular objective. When we come back, or the country comes back to work around mid-January, up to the end of March, we want to know within the next week what can we tell the public. And ideally, we want to tell the public no level 2 load shedding, and hopefully you might have a level quarter load shedding. I don't know what that means in practical terms, but the essence of this is that we need to start managing our power stations, our generators, the repairs, all in a way in which we remove this problem. Not only does it actually irritate citizens of this country, it creates a huge amount of uncertainty in the economy as well. We've had this experience, I believe, in 2008. I wasn't around at that time. We certainly had that experience in 2014 as well. And from about 2012, the Treasury has been warning that load shedding is what you call or energy supply is a binding constraint. In other words, it actually contracts the economy if you don't have enough energy supply within the economy itself. So ideally, the kind of good numbers that we saw from the third quarter, 2.2% GDP growth, is what Eskom doesn't want to be seen to be messing around with or interfering with in any kind of way. Part of the diagnostic problem was supposed to be also the supply and purchasing of coal. Now, this place became famous, some of you might remember, but if you don't, you can just research it quickly, that it would sign midnight contracts with Tegeta to obtain coal. It literally, in a couple of hours, the contract will be crafted. Tegeta will be given, as you might recall, 1.6 billion rands guarantee so that it can do all sorts of things. Prepayments of hundreds of millions of rands were given, and teleconferences were held by the board and the management at the time in order to facilitate the Guptas getting the contracts that they actually got. They run 3 mines, and the objective of the whole exercise at that time was to squeeze everybody out and make them the dominant suppliers as far as Eskom power stations are concerned. Now we are told it takes 1 year to contract. So from one night to 1 year. So there's something wrong in this kingdom, so to speak. And we've got the executive here who can give you more details if you like. But in the last hour or so, that's the detail that we went into. And we are given the assurance that by the end of December, whereas we were sitting with 14-day, 15-day, 20-day stocks at each of the power stations, we will get to at least 33 days stock at each of the power stations. And that will improve even further as we get into the first quarter of next year. So that's the one area. The second constraint more recently has been the supply of diesel. Now, diesel was quite an important driver in 2014. I don't think we've still figured out who actually supplied the diesel, at what cost did they supply the diesel, who were the beneficiaries of any premia that were added on to the cost at that particular time. And I think they were spending about R1 billion a week, right, or a day, a month, at the time, in order to keep the lights on, so to speak. So there has been usage of diesel, but it is clearly something that you want to minimize. But in fairness to the management, we've also had constraints, not just within South Africa, but Kahora Basa supplies about 1,400, I think, megawatts. More recently, it has a lapse of about 400 megawatts because of some power line not operating at an optimum level. So that's a matter that we're going to also get some look into. So in sum, what are we saying? Our plan is that the management needs to work in a much more activist and with a greater sense of urgency, activist way and a greater sense of urgency. Secondly, most of our resources should be focused into two areas. One, the power plant itself and its effectiveness. But the second is the power plants can work, but if the transmission lines begin to have problems, then you don't want that as a challenge as well. So more effort is going to go into inspecting transmission lines to make sure that we don't have unanticipated breakdowns in that particular regard as well. The second is to then make sure that we get the right level of skills in the right place, and some of that will happen in the next week or two, and some of that will happen by mid-January as well, because there is going to be, if you like, now, we used to reshuffles at Cabinet, there's going to be reshuffles here as well. Except for hopefully good reasons, not the bad reasons. So you're going to get skills aligned in the management team at a higher level than we have currently. The third is that we're going to find independent experts, a few of them, so that they could take an arm's length view of these plans and the nature of the problem, the nature of the solutions that we have prescribed, and give the are we moving in the right areas? Are we beginning to get things? Are there gaps that we've done so far? Because that allows us to get a better grasp on what is going on internally. The imbalance that we've seen in terms of allocation for maintenance, something that the management team will look at in the top of some of your minds, so we're going to address that in a moment. And then I come to Medupi, and there's a forensic program underway at the moment, and the first signals are now beginning to emerge. And we're finding that these big contractors are falling of in a power station like grinders, that's the grinding of the coal, is an important part within the boiler, which is supposed to be the heart of a power station. So once that forensic is complete, on the one hand, and firms like Hitachi on the other hand, in terms of what is going on. And we're also going to get to the bottom. Somebody's making money out of doubling the cost of Medupi. So we might have some early suspicions in this regard, but hopefully early in the new year we'll have a much better idea of why the cost has doubled and who were the beneficiaries of the extra costs that actually went on. Now, some of you would have heard some of us talk about, and me in particular, but others as well, about a fight back. In other words, the cleaning up of an important entity in governance terms, in financial management terms, in operational terms, is something that doesn't suit everybody. And when you capture an entity like this, you don't capture it for fun. You capture it because you can extract resources from this. So we want to send a message to those who like to issue tweets, former managers in Eskom. Can you please take your hands off Eskom? Go and find a job that will keep you busy. Because if you think you are the most skilled individual in town, I'm sure you'll have a job to do. Leave the Eskom board and management to do their bit. Don't try treasonous things which are going to get Eskom to perform less than its potential, even with the constraints that we have at the moment. And I'm sure by now, from some of the smiles I can see in the room, you've worked out who are the people who send out these tweets. They might actually, no, we don't have the facility. I asked them to extract some of those tweets so that in case you missed it, I'm not on Twitter, for example, we can find the tweet for you. But watch the Twitter space as we end this press conference. Right? And watch the different WhatsApp groups that are actually created around this as well. And see the hype in activity that you're going to see. And the only question one has to ask is, of what interest is Eskom to these people today? Leave us alone. There's a brave management team and board that has a piece of work to do. Let them do the piece of work that is actually required. And that will then help us to get many of the things right that we haven't quite got right in the short time that some of the people here have actually been in office. So to round up, we are going to try our best to get to a point where load shedding disappears before Christmas. So that some newspapers and media have been talking about dark Christmases and so on. We want to give the public the assurance that we're working very hard to ensure that that doesn't happen, and hopefully in the next week we can give you a much more concrete assurance in that regard. Secondly, we want to assure business that by the time you get back to work in January, we have a much more stable situation, and the economic impact of the instability in electricity supply is something that we either minimize or eliminate totally, so that our economy can continue to grow in a positive direction. Thirdly, we are saying to you that we've got a range of emergency plans, and the resources within this organization, the good resources and people with goodwill who want to see Eskom working, are going to be mobilized in order to ensure that we stabilize the situation and create and build on the kind of hope that we've actually had building up for the period earlier in this year, and particularly since President Ramaphosa took over where we are. Now, this doesn't mean that we've solved all of the problems. It certainly means that we're creating a stable environment and a stable base and foundation on which we can then begin to look at the more medium-term issues. And the more medium-term issues are the ones that some of you are going to raise, which is what's the future of Eskom? What are you going to do about its 400 billion rand debt? How are you going to manage some of the liquidity issues that you are currently dealing with? And our view is that if we can stabilize the current environment, and we are in serious conversations both overseas and locally with the financial sector, so that working capital doesn't become an issue in the immediate term. Secondly, the President will soon announce the formation of a task team in Cabinet, a small team of people who are going to work with the Eskom board and management and configure this roadmap, if you like, for the next 5 years or so, so we all have some certainty about where Eskom is actually going. And thirdly, there'll be still, I know there's a magical figure that's moving around in the stratosphere at the moment, X number of billion rands, but there's nothing definite about any amount of money at this point in time. It must, the money question will be entertained in the context of this roadmap over the next 5 years that Eskom has already been working on, and which we will discuss within government once we get back in the new year. So let me stop here, and the chair might want to add a word or two, and then we'll take your questions. Thank you.
Minister, not much, except to emphasize that the problems that we're having on the performance of the plant are not new. Historically, we've not dealt with them the way we should have. As it is becoming clear, we have not maintained when we should have maintained. And like all mechanical stuff, if you don't maintain, it's subject to wear and tear. So the stuff is wearing and is tearing. When we did get the money, we have rightly or wrongly decided that we're going to spend the money building new plant. And we so much hoped the new plant was going to come on stream on time and on budget. Regrettably, that has not happened. And the plant that we're supposed to retire, we had to go and pull out of mothball. We did not put the money to it, as the plant we were building continued to absorb most of the resources. We currently have to now consider this challenge that the squeaking wheel gets the attention. Squeaking wheel is generation now. We all get putting all efforts on the generation side. It is important that similarly we start to address the transmission and the distribution side of it, so that when we finish the generation, we're not having pylons falling. So that is what we're dealing with in the immediate. And in the medium to long term, as the minister said, we do realize that we've got to come. We do have some long-term lasting plans that we are currently discussing with the shareholder that we should be, hopefully will find acceptance and approval of those plans that we will be announcing. Suffice though to conclude that, as I was saying, these problems are not new. I think another point to be made is this cannot be solved by Eskom alone. These are problems that we have all caused as South Africans, either through our people or through our government, but these are problems that we've caused. So there's a role that we all have to play: shareholders, providers of capital, staff, customers. This is a choice of pain we need to take going forward to try and put us back in a sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman and the Minister. We will now open the floor for questions and answers. We will take them in batches of 5, maybe just to take as many as we can. I'll start here on my front. I'll take Antoinette. I'll take Angelo. I just want to check this side first. There's someone at the back, and then there's Terence there. And then there's also Mr. Mashiko from NUM. We'll start with Antoinette.
Antoinette Slobert from MoneyWeb. Minister, you said Medupi and Kusile is supposed to give us...
Sorry, just 1 minute, Antoinette. Can somebody increase the volume of that mic, please?
Is it better? Okay.
They didn't give you lunch, eh?
Okay, let me speak up. You said Medupi and Kusile is supposed to give us 7,800 megawatt. What is it giving us in fact?
No, let's just answer that one. It's 780 per unit.
Oh, 780. But what is the actual performance?
It varies, but we'll get the operations people to tell you in a moment.
Okay, and then what is the cost of unserved energy? What is the number that we work on at the moment for the cost of unserved energy? And I just want to ask, what is the situation with creditors? Is Eskom paying its creditors at the moment, or are you behind with paying your bills? And Minister, it seemed as if you are referring to a specific tweet that you described as treasonous. Which tweet is that?
Some of the homework you have to do yourselves.
Now, treasonous is just a very strong word.
It is. Undermining the electricity system which undermines the economy, which affects every citizen in this country, is treasonous. You can use it with a small t or a big T. Make your choice.
And just my last question, we've also seen a lot of misinformation in this current situation. Is government going to address that in any way?
Thank you, Antoinette. Angelo?
Minister Angelo Coppola from China Global Television. You talked about an independent group of experts to provide oversight, if I understood correctly. Who they're going to be reporting to and how is that going to be structured?
Thank you, Angelo. Terence?
This is our third briefing, Minister, and this is your first one. So there's a bit of a misalignment in communication between what we've heard previously and what we heard today. I just want to speak to two of those. One,
Sorry, man. Can't you get your equipment to work here?
yeah, okay. Can you hear me? So the misalignment around Madupi and Kusile, the communication that we've got up until now in the two previous briefings, is that these are teething problems that we should get out of the way. You are describing them as more fundamental problems that might not be able to be pushed out of the way, and actually you're going to have to take action against the OEMs rather, and we might never get the nameplate type capacity coming out of those plants. Can we get clarity on what is it? Is it teething problems or is it more fundamental? And if it is more fundamental, do we carry on and complete Kusile, for instance? The second misalignment is that we were speaking more about a federalist type approach at the power stations. Relinking, I think, was the term given. So the power station manager was going to get more power and was going to get appointed. You're talking about centralized deployment from megawatt cost. So which one is it? Are you going to give more power to the power station manager, or are you going to deploy experts from megawatt cost? We're not really on the road map forward. Can you give us some ideas to who will be in the target? Will it be assembly? Just in terms of the ministerial task team, Minister, who will be part of that task team? When will it?
Just hold on a sec, Terence. Yeah.
1, 2. Two.
Okay, in terms of the roadmap, we've also heard very little.
Try our best. You know, you should join the prosecuting authorities. Very good question.
Also been cut off.
Mashiko.
I'm going to ask Mr. Mashiko, and Siswam, after Mr. Mashiko, I'll take you. I'm not discriminating against you. Mr. Mashiko?
what is your plan with Eskom? Are you going to privatize Eskom or not? That should be answered, and South Africans must know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shiko. I would like to really appeal at what was Mr. Shiko, and hopefully I'm not discipling other members. This is primarily a media briefing for the members of the media, but if possible at all, maybe we'll give the media a chance first, because this was meant for them. But because there are other channels for you to meet with management and the minister to discuss those issues. But I'm with you. Let's take Soweto TV.
Hi, this is Kopano Gumbi from CNBC Africa. I just wanted to ask you about your plans for debt restructuring and liquidity. I mean, 400 billion in debt is quite a large number, and you only briefly touched on what the plans are. If we could get a little more clarity about what exactly we should expect from debt restructuring and plans around the debt.
Thank you, Kopano. Chair and the Minister, that will be the first round of questions. I'll hand over to you.
Minister, if I can just answer this one question on the creditors. I am not aware of creditors that we have not paid. I saw something in the media today say people are not supplying us because we're not paid. I'm not aware of a creditor that we have not paid. We are paying our creditors on time.
Okay, so on Medupi, it's 780 times 6. So it's supposed to be 6 units. Each one is supposed to be providing 780 megawatts. Only 3 of them are online, shall we put it? Am I right? And so 3 times, say, 8 is 2,400. So you're expecting 2,200 and something out of them, and you're getting less than that. That's the point we're making. And part of the problem is some of the instability caused by some of the factors that we are talking about here. And let me link that to Terence's problem. Terence, don't put words into my mouth. I didn't talk about never get out of the problem and so on. All we are saying is that in the spirit of frankness, these are things that we've discovered, I've discovered, and I'm sharing it. To say, frankly, there are issues there. There are problems with design and construction with some of the key components of a power station. I told you who's responsible and could be responsible. And I also said to you that there's an investigation that's going on that will give us a more comprehensive answer early in the new year. I've also explained, if you combine your point about misinformation, so there was a WhatsApp message, I think, that was moving around late last night, that the whole day today no electricity would be available. And that's fake news. Right? Now, why are Eskom issues becoming the subject of fake news? There's something going on there. You should be asking the question, not me. So, and then of course there are these tweets. Now let me explain the word treasonous. There's a direct relationship between welfare of workers, welfare of the citizens, welfare of this economy, and the welfare of Eskom. Those are all interconnected issues. If for some reason or the other you want to undermine what we're trying to do here, then it amounts to colloquially treason. I'm not telling you this section of this act, but it amounts to treason. You are undermining a key entity within the state, which is because Eskom is 100% owned by the state at this point in time. So you can make of it as you please. Experts will come back to the details and let you know, but they'll report to the chair of the board. On the question of so-called internal federalism, in fact, the intention is to empower local power station managers once we have all of them in place. Secondly, to ensure that they have the right support structure and, if you like, second-level management within the power station personnel structure as well. Thirdly, that they are able to do a lot more to improve the quality of skills that are accessible to them. And fourthly, they are accountable for the output. They are accountable for the output from a particular power station. So if we expect 2,000 megawatts from a particular power station, the power station manager is accountable for delivering 2,000 megawatts. If they don't, then they must sacrifice something in the process as well. If they give us 2,200 or 2,400, an incentive scheme is going to be worked out for that. So that people who perform better than the average must be recognized and rewarded in some kind of way. But once those details are available, they would be made public. There's no contradiction between deploying experts or more knowledgeable people or more experienced people from megawatt park to a particular power station. We are in an emergency mode. We are in a crisis mode. When you are in a crisis, you deploy all of your resources where they are most required, not sitting at megawatt park because you happen to be at head office. That will be irresponsible to allow that to actually continue. So it's a very logical thing to do, and I don't see any contradiction between the two. In terms of the roadmap, well, as I think the chair has explained a number of times, and I think they've been very transparent with you, that they had a company called Lazard in here to look at the balance sheet. They have Boston Consulting in here to look at what the structure and the organizational design of the future. It's fairly public knowledge that the world trend is towards separating generation from transmission. How does that happen? And it has been discussed in South Africa before. Some of you might remember the ISMO concept that was floated around a while ago. So once we have all of this packaged in a particular way, we will certainly make that public. And that's the spirit of this press conference, that we want to be open about what is actually happening. So once those details are available, we'll make that known. Mr. Masheko, I think the spirit in Eskom, certainly, and in the department, is that we want to work with the trade unions. And that's what we did when we got all of you around the table. Now, some of the media has misinterpreted that intervention from the ministry to say we instructed the management to actually settle at a particular level. We didn't. That meeting where I convened the management and the unions was about to create an atmosphere where normal wage negotiations happen. Some of you have been misrepresenting it in your columns. No numbers were discussed, and no numbers have been discussed subsequently. That's the job of the board and the management. So I know some of you might like to take swipes, but don't take the wrong swipes. That's irresponsible. On the question of the future of the staff, that's what the board will discuss with the unions when we get to that point. We're not at that point at this point in time. But what we want is a spirit in which the chair approached this question, that we have a problem, not only in Eskom, in many entities, where the cost structure of the entity doesn't justify the current operations and revenue in those entities. In other words, if you're only making 1,000 rands through the operations of a particular business, you can't pay 1,500 rands out in expenses every month. Right? So you have a deficit of 500 rands every month. Who is supposed to supply the 500 rands? Where does that money actually come from? So I think as a country we need to, we must firstly demystify all of this for you. The financial people here will have their own way of looking at things, but let's simplify it for the public. If Eskom is only making 1,000 rands a month, and it has to spend 1,500 rands a month, there's a difference of 500 rands between the two. Where do we get the difference from? Now, we don't claim to have a monopoly on ideas. I'm sure the board will agree with that. So why don't we have a debate? Why don't we have a creative discussion about how to solve the problem in a way in which everybody benefits and there are the least number of losers that are involved? And the last thing we want is to have the kind of scale of retrenchments that some of you might have been actually entertaining and might have been mentioned in the past. On the turnaround strategy, as I said earlier on, it's not just Eskom's job, it's a government-wide issue as well, given the context that I've just given you. If every SOE only makes 1,000 rands a month and spends 1,500 rands a month in whatever way it spends it, then we've got a problem. And if you don't have enough money in the fiscus, where's the money supposed to come from? So, there's no magic in this. It's 500 rands needs to be found from somewhere every month. And if your debt levels are reaching the levels that Eskom has of over 400 billion rands, or the country has of over 2 trillion rands, you can't just keep borrowing either. So let's come up with ideas rather than become adversarial in this. And we would welcome ideas, both from the public and from important stakeholders like the unions as well. So you asked the question, Mr. Masheko, and this is the favorite line of people who are wanting to distract the real debates we need to have, amongst which is the question I've just raised. Where do we find the money? There is no government decision to privatize. Let's make that clear. And that privatization story is being used for political purposes. Now, we can decide whether we want to be part of that political narrative and cause political mischief, or we want to, in a responsible and constructive way, find a way into the future for each of the entities that we're dealing with. And we all know we're going towards elections. We all know that recapturing institutions that were under state capture is not the favorite thing people want. Some people want. Because we have cut the supply chain. Right? So if you are able to pull out X amount of money from a particular tender or contract or whatever the case is, and you're not able to do that any longer, then obviously you're going to start finding all sorts of excuses. And you create all sorts of narratives as well. We seem to have forgotten Bell Pottinger, for example. Remember the role they played in South Africa in undermining and promoting, firstly, state capture, and undermining the processes of good governance and integrity and good financial management in our outfits. How do we forget Bell Pottinger? Who brought Bell Pottinger to South Africa? We didn't. Why were they brought here? To promote democracy and good governance? Or were they brought here to actually undermine democracy and good governance? Now today there's more modern forms of Bell Pottinger that are actually operating. And we'll talk about that when the appropriate time comes. But let's be quite clear. The issue is not about privatization. The issue is, where does that 500 rand difference between revenue and expenditure come from? Where do we find that money? When you have that problem at a household level, you go to a bank or a financial institution and you say, can you lend me 500 rands for this month and next month? Then I promise to pay it back like this. That's how you do it, isn't it? That's what a roadshow is about. A roadshow is to go to people who have the money and to convince them that they need to lend the money to Eskom so that we can create a bridge between the 1,000 rands and the 1,500 rands in some way. But that means that you keep increasing debt. You cannot allow 400 billion to become 500 billion. Who's going to pay it? Who's going to make 400 billion rands in the next few years to actually pay back the borrowing? Because you've got to pay the original amount that you've borrowed and you've got to pay the interest as well. And when you have a lower credit rating, you pay higher interest as well. We need to educate our public about that. So we can go and swear at ratings agencies and so on as much as we like, but the chair and his colleagues had telephone conferences with some of the rating agencies this morning. They don't represent themselves, they're representing the country. And they're representing this institution as a whole. So, that links to the last question about debt restructuring. As I said, that's an issue that is being discussed in government. Sometime in the new year, government as a whole will give you some idea of where we're going, together with the roadmap also.
Minister, Nelsue will talk about the cost, the unserved cost.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chairperson. The figures that we have on the cost of unserved energy, the cost of unserved energy basically is an opportunity cost of load shedding. So the last time the calculations were done was in 2014, which was the last time we had load shedding. So hence therefore, I do have a table that I can share with you, because in that table, it actually specifies per sector what are the actual values of the cost of unserved energy. For example, the construction sector is about 219 rand, 36 cent, with the lowest in the mining sector being about 10 rand. So basically, that table basically indicates what actually is the cost of unserved energy for each and every sector.
Just a last point that perhaps is addressing. We clearly want a motivated workforce. We certainly understand the continued uncertainty of where the organization is going is bound to create that demoralized. And I have indicated that part of our road shows is to sit down with the workers and share with them. Firstly, let's all agree that the problem is as we see it. Hopefully they will agree that's the problem. And then we'll put on the table how we see this problem solved. And they may have a different and better way of solving it. And because this is not our problem alone. I emphasize that we can't solve this alone. At the results presentation, we mentioned, Minister, that we have, just out of a pure, proper management discipline, we are approaching this organization on the basis that we must delineate, functionally separate these various areas, generation, transmission, distribution, see them for what they are, see them in their own P&L, so that we can, in each one of them, tell where inefficiencies are, how to bring inefficiencies, who's being carried, how is it being carried. That's the one thing. But it's an important discipline, so that when we go and meet the regulator, NESA, about tariff discussion, there is no more question about how much it costs to produce a megawatt of energy. Once that has been universally accepted, benchmarked with anybody else who generates or who transmits and who distributes, we will hopefully reach a point where there's no more debate about what it costs. There may be a debate about the margin. There might not be a debate anymore about what it costs. And then we can then be told that the tariff that we are seeking is or is not cost reflective. That's one. We then said we will reach a next stage, is indeed the more difficult one, of legally unbundling. I was at pain to say we're not talking about the ownership of Eskom. We're talking about what is the best way in which you can operate and run this. The legal unbundling difference is that now you've got to start to allocate the debt in the various areas. So we have never, it's not in our place to talk about we don't own the asset. Only the owners of the asset can decide how it wants to deal with it. Ours is to manage and operate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chair. I think, okay, sorry, thanks, Chair. I think Terence asked two questions, and I'd like to look at them. He's talking about misaligned communication with Medupi and Kusile, and that is, we spoke about teething problems, and the Minister is highlighting other issues. There's no denying that we have teething problems in Medupi and Kusile. However, notwithstanding this, it's also true that, for example, in Medupi, we were paid 3 times the projected value at the beginning. It is also true, through the information that we are getting, that there was collusion between some of the employees of Eskom with some private businesses to inflate these prices. So these are things that we have to look into, and that's what Minister is talking about. Then, Terence, you talked about relinking and sending people to power stations. We are not saying that those people that over the power stations will now have to report back here. But what we are saying is when we take them there, they will not report to Megawatt Park. They will be reporting to the power station managers.
Thank you so much. I understand that there's someone on the line, Carol Payton.
Hi, thanks very much, Kulu. I would like to know, I mean, what are you telling bondholders and credit ratings agencies at this point about your plan for financial sustainability, especially the issue that Ms. Mabuza just raised around once you do the split and you start looking at the idea of splitting up the different parts of Eskom, where does the debt lie? And how do the bondholders get assured that their bonds are going to be repaid? Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. I'll go to my left-hand side. I see Alex. We'll combine with the others. Oh, okay. Carol, if you can still hear us, we're going to respond to you immediately, and then we'll take the other people later on.
Carol, as the Minister said, we as the board, as management and the board, we have some thoughts and some plans on how Eskom can be saved in a sustainable way going forward. And as the Minister says, we don't claim monopoly on ideas. These are our thoughts. We have workshopped these thoughts. We've had various iterations with our responsible Minister. We have still to meet the Treasury and the DOE as it affects, there are policy issues and there are funding issues. What we are telling bondholders, we are not saying, just back to the point about legal separation, I'm saying we are now wanting to go and functionally separate. We're saying the next phase of this would be, and it would take longer, would be the legal separation. The reason it would take longer is because you now need to go into that very exercise of debt allocation. So we are not yet there. I was just showing you where our headspace is at. We've been thinking up to that point, not beyond who owns the asset. That was the point I was making. What we're telling the debt holders, we released our results on Wednesday. Minister, we were in Cape Town with a roadshow on the results on Thursday. We're in Joburg on Friday. We're in London on Monday, New York on Tuesday, Boston on Wednesday, back to rating agencies today in London. These are the people that gave us the money. We have told them that when we present the results, we'll tell them how we think about Eskom in the long term. So the very points the very examples you've given, Minister, people, we need to go back to them in answering the question on liquidity to get money. But we must first tell them how we're going to pay the debt that they currently have. So we are explaining to them, this is what we as Eskom can do in containing our costs. This is what we as Eskom can do in enhancing our revenue. There is this big millstone of historic debt that's sitting in our book. So that's the kind of conversation we're having, and I repeat, this is our views that we are still having to get everybody, including Treasury, hopefully to buy into it. They might have different and better views. We will welcome that. That's what we are saying to the people that have given us money.
Thank you, Chairman. Alex, I see you, and then I see increasing the numbers. And I see Lucanio, I see Sikonati, and I also see at the front, I think it's Devald, and then Mr. Ted Blom. Ted Blom, I'm taking you basically just to balance the equation, because someone will say I took Mr. Mashiho and then I'm discriminating against you. So I'll take those five, I think it is, starting with Alex.
Thank you. Alex Winning from Reuters News Agency. When you talked about debt restructuring, I'd just like to clarify. Are you referring to short-term debt? Are you referring to DFI debt? Are you referring to private investors holding bonds? Because when you say that...
Can I put a cautionary out, as they say? Can we leave this debt issue for now? We're not going to give you any answer that's any different. It's work in progress. It's obviously when you're dealing with 400 billion rands of debt, it's not something that you can deal with easily in the kind of context that we find ourselves in. Just give us until early in the new year, and then we'll get back and be very transparent about where we're going. And as I said, and the chair said this as well, you can't deal with just the debt issue without looking at a new, if you like, organizational way forward as well. All of that work isn't complete yet. Our immediate concern is get the operations working. Otherwise, the debt situation becomes worse. If you get the operations working, you get revenue in. You get revenue in, you have a slightly different balance between revenue and cost as well. So if you don't mind, can we hang on with any question to do with debt? It won't be helpful at this point in time.
Thank you, Minister. Lucanio?
Hi, Minister. It's Lucanio from Business Day. I mean, you said you'd like management to act with more urgency. I know you said something similar at SAA recently. I mean, is this a standard line, or is there something specific here that you're unhappy about? And do you still have faith in the board and the management? And then second, do you still have faith in the board and management to turn things around? And secondly, when you talked about the task force and something to be done over the next 5 years, I mean, people will remember there was once like a war room, I think. It was chaired by the deputy president at the time, who's the president now. So people might, don't you worry, people might be skeptical and ask, do we really have 5 years? I mean, shouldn't we have had a plan already? And yeah, what happens in the next 5 years? I mean, do we have that time? I mean, how much time do you actually have before we fix it, before it actually gets the economy working?
Thank you, Lucanio. Sikonati?
My name is Sekonati. I work for the Financial Mail and Lucanio Mnyanda. Minister, help us here, please. Why are you here today? What exactly have you come to tell us? 1. 2, you spoke early in your introduction about consequence management, about and Eskom being in the center of the fraud and the looting and the treason that happened here. I have asked Pagamani Hadebe before, and I have asked Jabu Mabuza before, when are they laying charges of theft, fraud and corruption against McKinsey? You mentioned the amount 1.6 billion rand. They have given many non-answers and kept changing their minds. Now, can you tell us, this is 1.6 billion rand, you've got the ultimate political responsibility for this organization. When is Pagamani...
So you've just answered your first question.
Hear me out, sir. When is Pagamani Hadebe and Jabu Mabuza laying charges of theft, fraud and corruption against McKinsey? Let's then move on to the operational matters. You've Eskom has requested its senior managers to cancel leave. I hope I'm not making things up. Correct me if I am wrong. It's the same people that have been here for 2 years when Eskom depleted its coal stockpiles. They've been sitting here for 2 years watching the thing go down, and we know, of course, the story today in the Natal Witness is not the first, is not the last. Coal is sitting that Eskom has paid for and paid people to collect it from the mines, but nobody is collecting the coal. These people that you are asking not to go and leave, what are they going to do all of a sudden? They've been here for 2 years and they have been running the thing down. I'll ask all my questions since Chinua Achebe urges us to take down all the firewood we need. Jabu Mabuza said in July or in June that there would be a plan about this debt that you are now saying let's not talk about at this point. Gave us a deadline of September about a restructuring, and at that point, of course, they were talking about converting the debt to equity, which has now been updated to other things. Let's just admit it, there's no plan here. We bumbling along from day to day. We don't know how to fix this organization. Thank you.
If you can pass the mic to the front. Thank you.
Hi. It's Dewald from City Press. Just 2 relatively small questions. We find ourselves now with very high unplanned loss factor, planned loss factor, and we have a bunch of station units on reserve storage as well. Could you just clarify whether the coal stockpile situation contributes at all to unavailable capacity? I mean, I think we've got about 17,000 megawatts in capacity. That's just not, doing anything right now. And secondly, just again on the issue of the OEMs, Minister mentioned Hitachi by name about 3 times. Are we referring to something new that's not the poor boiler work that occurred a few years ago? I think it's fair to ask why that company's name was mentioned a couple of times.
Thank you, Gerald. The last one will be right at the back as Swazi. It's Mr. Ted Blom.
Ted Blom from Mining and Energy Advisors. I've got 4 points, if I may, Mr. Basibi.
Which media house?
No, from Mining and Energy Advisors, sir.
Okay.
And we have about 480,000 followers on our website. I must commend the Minister on declaring a crisis here today. But in my knowledge, and together with what Sikonati said, this crisis has been more than 5 years in coming. With previous war rooms, non-availability of coal, bakeries and bread, and heavens knows what next. So I hope that we are now serious about fixing up this organization, because it's been limping along for a long time. The Minister mentioned that there seems to be funny things going on at Eskom. I've been calling for a forensic report and analysis of Eskom since 2010. I want to ask the Minister, are you going to investigate this thing forensically, or must the public do it? Because somebody has to do it. And if the government is not capable of doing it, I will rally the public behind me to do it. The next thing I want to mention is, at the previous meeting here at Eskom a week ago, I asked what's the coal availability in Mpumalanga province. I've been told it's less than 50%. Is that true? My last question is, there's an elephant in the room, and that's in the form of renewables. Renewables have taken 34 billion odd of Eskom's revenue for this year. The number for next year, I'm told, is close to 50 billion. If renewables is taking more and more slice of Eskom's revenue, then something needs to happen within Eskom to either accommodate that, or compete against it, or do something. But we can't ignore the elephant in the room any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Chairman and Minister.
Minister, Paramani will answer the question, Skonati, about the charges. We've dealt with Alex's question by not dealing with it. Minister, let Paramani just deal with this Mackenzie thing in the Skonati list.
Thanks, Chair. Sikonati, the story remains, but now I will tell you. Colonel Smith has given us a note, and SIU has confirmed that the case was opened in November. We have a case number. We were carrying it on the financials because I thought you'd be here. I left it, I'll email it to you. It explains everything. Just like we indicated, that in situations like Eskom now, you don't go and open a case, pay individual. What SIU has done, which is giving us a lot of mileage, is that they take a project, let's say Project Tegeta, then they have a long list of people that have to be investigated. They have one Tegeta case. That's exactly the same story. You'll get the information.
So does that mean you have laid charges of corruption, fraud, and theft against Mackenzie? Yes or no?
Yes, the cases are there. The case of theft is opened.
Against Mackenzie?
Yes, I'm saying
That's
that.
what you said the last time and you changed your mind.
No, I didn't say that. I'm not going to.
Skonati ubuzile umbuzo unga-dialogue in the answer. Accept the answer or reject it. Don't dialogue with my chief executive. Minister, the article on witness we finally spoke to the lady. This is not coal that is lying as she is a lady coming from the Chamber of Commerce in the region. What she says is that she did not say there's coal lying that Eskom is not collecting. She says as a chamber, she has a responsibility to defend the region from disinvestment when people say there is no coal in Mpumalanga. She's saying there is coal underground in Mpumalanga. We can't not be calling for people to invest in coal. That's different from saying there's coal that we want to give to Eskom and it's not taking. Just specifically to the witness article. Minister, yeah, I'm thick-skinned enough. I know we're not bumbling. I know we have a plan. The plan might not be the one that would give us answers. We have a plan. We are presenting the plan to you, Minister. We are still in the process of taking it to other stages in government. We said we'll deliver the plan in September. We came back and said, give us time, we want to do it in November. And we did explain that is the procurement process that we needed to go through to find external sources to stress test and validate our own hypotheses. So the process at Eskom took that much longer before we could commission BCG and Lazard. We have a plan. We've tabled the plan. It is the proposal I keep on referring to. The plan, we now need to be told, we accept your plan, management and board, or we're not accepting, but we do have a plan in the long term of how we're going to compress costs, how we're going to generate revenue, what to do with debt. We do have that plan.
Okay, so the first two questions were a set of questions. You want to come in on?
Minister, I can just give feedback to the gentleman you're in front. Your comment on the unavailability of our system, is it contributable to coal as it is now? No, it's not. It's about the unavailability of our generation plant. So that's the problem that we have at this point in time. Is it saying that we have sufficient coal stock levels? No, we don't. Are we working hard to get those stock levels to where it should be? Yes, we are. But to answer your question, as it is now, it's generation plant availability. The second question was on the OEMs. It is design. It's a combination. So it's quality. It's execution problem, but it's also design problems, specifically on the boilers, the mills, as well as on the fabric filter plants. So there is a negotiation coming with Hitachi specifically, which we need to address. We need to understand what we've specified and what they tendered for and what we eventually received. But it doesn't eliminate the fact that there's also an execution as well as on our side an oversight problem. Thank you.
Can you pass on the mic to Dan there to just talk a little bit more on the coal issue? Sorry, could to
come forward. Come. You want to know who this mysterious character is?
Okay, good afternoon. I think the request is to respond to the question about how much coal, is available. We dealt with this issue, I think, in the last meeting. There is sufficient coal, in South Africa to supply domestic market, export market, and Eskom. The coal reserves, obviously, in Mpumalanga are depleting, but there is still coal, looking at how much coal we require. The one thing that I also mentioned the last time is that there hasn't been sufficient investment in new mines to get the coal off the ground to be able to meet the requirements. The coal cliff that was predicted, to hit us around 2018, if you look at the work that was done by both the Chamber or the Minerals Council and also done by Wood Mackenzie on our behalf, is that we are now dropping below the 250 million ton production of coal that we've been used to, through the years. That going forward now, the operating mines are unable to give 250 million tons to sustain, domestic market, export and so on. But the coal on the ground, there is plenty. And if you look at where the most... Yeah. Is there enough supply at the power stations? Not entirely. What we've got as a plan, like Yannis said, is now we have sourced sufficient coal to see us through this financial year, the next financial year. We should be covered, and we're working on the long-term plan basically to recoup things like investing in the cost-plus mines so that we can get the coal that is on the ground and get them to their contractual level and closing the gap. The shortfall for Eskom until the end of life for all the power stations, it's sitting at about 1.3 billion tons. So if we have to look at the life of the power station and what we need to procure, with the extensions of the life beyond 40 years and so on, there is still coal to be sourced and so on. Yeah.
Dan, can you just deal with a question on Mpumalanga coal from Kent?
The Mpumalanga coal, that's a part I've dealt with, is that the studies that have been done with the Council of Geosciences, as indicated, there is, sufficient coal on the ground. But going forward, there may be shortages with certain grades of coal. For example, 5,500 kilocalorie coal, which some of our stations are utilizing and so on.
Sorry, Minister, just the other point, and I think what Dennis just said, I listened a bit to some clip. Somebody sent me a clip of what Ted Blom was saying to Ndoro the other day on news, that it's the investment in mining that has not been done to mine the coal. Two, over time, Eskom used to procure on long-term contracts upwards of 60% of its coal. We have now moved to more short-term in a bigger in bigger proportion than the 60% historically we used to do, which is what subjects us to the current challenges that management at Eskom took that decision for whatever the reason, but that's the reality. We have moved from 60% of long-term contracts to around 30% of long-term contracts, and we are now buying, as Paramani says, hand to mouth, and you cannot, you would need the power station for this period. You should be procuring for the longer term. So, Minister, can I ask you to deal with the agency? You also mentioned reshuffles. And I think Lucanio was also alluding to the reshuffles you were talking about. He asked you a question about the board and management. So those are all yours now that are left, Minister, and you can help us answer some of the questions that Ted has raised on forensic, on crisis, and on spoken about coal availability. And on the renewables, it is government policy. We don't make that policy at Eskom. Ours is the sole buyer, and ours is just to connect those renewables at the point that is agreed. We don't even negotiate the price. The prices have long been negotiated. It is, unfortunately, we get set policy by government.
All right, so Lucanio, your point about urgency, and it's linked to Sekunati's question about why am I here? I'm here because, not just at this press conference, we've been watching this for the last 10 days or so, and then, as I said earlier on, we've spent many hours trying to understand the current crisis in its detail. So we are here because the country is concerned about where is Eskom going. Do they have some certainty about power supply? And what is this load shedding about, and what's causing it? And what plan do we have to ensure that it doesn't recur, either with the severity with which level 2 comes, or for the length of time that it might actually turn out to actually last. So we have a crisis. We also have a crisis, as I said earlier on, in terms of communicating. We haven't been communicating properly in terms of what's going on and what the public can expect, and the spirit in which we need to approach some of the challenges that we have. And Mr. Blom is right. It's not 5 years in the coming. This problem is more than 10 years in coming. So if you go back to the crisis in 2008, but even before that, to 1998 and 1999, when government made certain choices about not building new plants and hoping that the private sector would come in, and so on and so on. So there's a series of issues that we need to confront, and confront in an honest way. But there's no point in looking back and blaming. Understanding what has happened is very important. Right now, the urgency arises from the fact that we need to serve South Africa better, serve its economy better, and give citizens the assurance that this board, this management, and the 40-odd thousand people that are working in Eskom are doing the right thing in order to get ourselves out of the current crisis that we actually have. Does that mean that one doesn't have faith in the board and so on? This is not a normal corporate environment. I come from an activist background, so I'm not sure whether you have that. So over the years, that's 40-odd years of activism, it served me very well. So all I'm doing is making sure that if need be, we address all the staff, we make it clear what the nature of the issues that we are confronting is, and that we need to pull together. Same applies to SAA. The pilots can blame the cabin crew can blame the management can blame the commercial section, or you can blame the competitors. The fact of the matter is the SAA is now sitting at 25% of market share. It used to have over 60% of market share. Now, do you have the management team that's going to actually recover market share and make a go of it, and place SAA in a less vulnerable position financially? The same applies here as well. Market share isn't an issue because it's a monopoly for now, except that there are IPPs and there are other independent producers as well. So this is about working as a team, not just watching from above and ensuring that all the governance tick boxes or boxes are actually ticked, but making sure that at an operational level, the right things are in fact being done so that we can give the right kind of assurances. I mean, your skepticism, I don't want to call it cynicism right now, about war rooms and so on, is a fair one. So all we can tell you is judge us by the outcome, not by the mechanism. So give us till the end of January. If we fail, we'll come back to this press conference and tell the public we've failed. If we succeed or half succeed, then we'll say whatever we've done has worked for now, but a lot more needs to be done to place Eskom on a much more sustainable footing. So that's the approach that you can expect from us. So that linked to your question about how much time. There's the very short term of this week and next week. There's the slightly longer short term, if you like, up to the end of the year and middle of January. There's up to the March period, and then there's beyond that. So some things are not good. For example, those rotor blades that needed to be attended to. If you have an 18-month lead time on them, the fact of the matter is that you'll have to wait 12 to 18 months until you can actually sort that out. So Sikonati and Pagamani are transacting.
Sikonati's been given the case number, Minister.
Yeah, but that could have waited until I'm finished. It's rude on both their parts. Yeah. Sikonati, don't worry, he'll hold you to account, but that doesn't mean you must jump. Consequence management, you've had the charge, the case number given to you now, Sikonati, so that's the start. There are many more charges to come, and I want to link that to Mr. Blom's question about forensic. I don't know what forensic you have in mind, but we have the SIU here. They've already given me some indication of what their findings are, and they're quite serious. Once we're ready, that report will come out. And there are going to be consequences arising from that report. Secondly, there are active criminal investigations happening as well. I'm afraid it's not my job to give you the details. Ask the Hawks about that, and let's see what they want to share with you. But there is a process underway. And with changes in the prosecuting authority, there's a better chance now of making sure that the kind of impunity that we've seen in the country is hopefully in a year's time or less a thing of the past. And there are other forensic reports that are part of the equation as well, including the lifestyle audits that have been undertaken. So if you want details, I'm sure the Eskom colleagues can actually enable you to do so. Sikonati's skepticism about the same team being here 2 years ago, Sikonati, you have to work with what you have, just like you do in the newsroom. And you don't always get the best product, but you've got to make a go of it, and you know that better than I do. So we won't talk about the quality of journalism in South Africa at the moment, leave that for you a little later. But that is why we said earlier on that if need be, we will buy in skills or bring back skills that were chased out of Eskom as well. That's part of the activism that we want to actually see in order to reinforce the management team. And there has to be, as we said earlier, a lot more accountability. If you do bad things here, you can't sit here. If you don't perform, you don't deserve to be here. That's the end of that's the bottom line. So we all got to lift our game and make a contribution, as the chair said earlier on, to making sure that things happen in the right way. I think we should be careful about the terms we use about debt restructuring, because if you've been holidaying in Greece, debt restructuring means a particular thing. In particular, for bald people like you and me, there's no possibility of haircuts. So I think we want to make it clear that what we are talking about is how do we address our responsibility to pay back money that has been borrowed. So plain and simple. And provide the confidence that is required that will be done in a particular way at a particular point in time. So we're not moving to Greece right now. And I think the chair has addressed the issue of bumbling along. Hopefully we don't sound like that. But we'll take your warning and try to improve what we actually do here. Mr. Blom's issues, I think we've now covered all of them. But I think what we do need to do is to address the cost of IPPs and the kind of burden it does create. When I was on the other side in the Treasury and getting IPPs going, it was great to have those hundreds of billion rands of investment. Secondly, don't forget our commitments to the climate change process. So whoever pays for the IPPs, in whatever form, you're going to need renewables in this country. The question is, at what cost? Because costs have fallen dramatically over the last while, and Eskom must have the benefit of the drop in costs as well, ultimately, in terms of the kind of investment that it needs to make in this particular area. So the new IRP is talking about a different mix in energy, and certainly renewables are part of that. We don't want to be in the Donald Trump camp, where we are denialist about what are just being reported over the last week in terms of the new increases in temperature, increases in emission, and the dangers that the globe faces. We must make our contribution in that regard as well. So to sum up, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a challenge. We will communicate better. Our aim and the instructions to Eskom is get this load shedding out of the way as soon as you can. Move from level 2 to level 1 as soon as you can, and we'll keep the public better informed about what is going on in that particular regard. Secondly, clearly the coal problem is one, but ultimately we have to find solutions for the debt that Eskom has, but also this imbalance, as I was explaining, between cost and revenue. And the country should participate in that debate and say, finding ourselves where we are, how do we create the right kind of environment in that regard? Thirdly, we've given you some idea of the outlines of an action plan in terms of deployment of skills, careful inspection of power stations, timelines, responsibility, accountability, and consequences. And that will be finalized shortly, and the elements of it are already being put in place. Fourth, I think Eskom must become, and all 40,000 people in Eskom must become a lot more aware of the responsibility that we have to 60 million citizens on the one hand, and the economy on the other hand. Because a failure here or a less than adequate performance here means consequences outside, and the country can't afford those consequences, including increasing tariffs on a scale that the economy can't manage. And that begins to impact upon the competitiveness of the economy as well. So when I sit with cabinet colleagues, that's one of the concerns that they raise. So we've got to look at that on our side. We've talked about the independent review, we've talked about the roadmap, and our concern about people who are outside interfering in internal processes of Eskom as well. But I'm optimistic, so to respond to your point, this board has really applied itself, and perhaps it needs to do a little bit more work in the short term to give the motivation that's required, and we will support them in every way possible. And I'm sure that the management team, with all its limitations, will try to do their best to implement the action plan that we've agreed on. And thanks very much for being here. If you leave about now, you'll avoid load shedding.
Minister, just not to have the last word. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we have explained why we got here and how we're going to go out of here in the medium and in the long term. But the one thing that we want to give you is it's not nice to tell you the interim results that we have losses, profit that is less by 8 billion to the one we reported earlier. But the one thing we can tell you, as I said when we presented the first set of results here, we don't know what we don't know. And as soon as we find it, we will tell you. The results might not be nice, but they are the truth. We will tell you the truth. We don't have a mandate to keep lights on at all costs. We've got a mandate to keep lights on within costs. Thank you very much.
One last appeal, both to you and whoever else might be listening in. Please help us over the next couple of weeks to encourage South Africans to cut down electricity usage. So go back to the 2014 period, make sure you're using the right kind of equipment, undertake whatever savings you can on the electricity side, because that's one way of all of us contributing to a lighter load on Eskom. And we'd appreciate the help of the media to communicate this and reinforce our message as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kulu.
Also, why it? Yeah, it makes it easier to edit.